So I'm incredibly lucky to have a very generous and trusting friend loan me this awesome 2015 Triumph Daytona 675R for a few days. So I figure what better opportunity than to make a little short review video. We'll give that a shot. I've got a bunch of experience previously on the first gen Daytona 675. I owned a 2007 that I put a lot of miles on. I sold it with about 43,000 miles. Probably at least 5,000 of, I would say, were track miles. That definitely did not have an easy life. But it was great almost the whole time I had it. And then now my wife has a 2014 Triumph Street Triple R. I've got a bunch of seat time on that as well. So that's based on the same platform as this bike, though they're definitely very different bikes with very different characters. The Street Triple being the upright naked version of this. They actually share engine cases but have different bore and stroke. So the engines have very different characters. The Street Triple has a lot more mid-range and kind of low end, and this has a lot more up top. The Daytona has about 20 more horsepower at the top end than the Street Triple does, but the Street Triple's torque peak comes on a few thousand RPM earlier, which really helps around town. So it's been great. It's smooth, super easy to ride in traffic, seems easy to ride fast. But you know what? Ultimately, this is not what this bike is meant for. Let's do the kind of riding that this bike is really intended for. This is the kind of riding this bike is really meant for. Tight, twisty, technical. First impressions is that it feels really light. Super flickable. Super cliche to say, but it's like a scalpel. Turns in really nice and fast. It doesn't feel super stable mid-corner, probably just because of how fast it steers and how light it is. But it certainly doesn't feel like it's gonna let you down mid-corner. It's just that every little imperfection and incorrect steering input you give it is translated into a movement from the bike. It's just hyperactive and super precise. Whereas the engine feels a little lacking in low end and mid-range when you're cruising around town. The slipper clutch works good. When you're in the twisties and you're keeping it on boil, it feels like the power's right where you want it to be. Considering it has stock gearing, which is pretty tall, I'm pretty impressed that it's pulling some second gear power wheelies out of corners once in a while. And of course, first gear. Which you do end up using first gear a little more than I would have expected because it is so tall. Considering that it's set up pretty stiff, and I believe my friend has this probably set to track settings. It soaks up the rough road pretty well. And this is one of the rougher parts of twisty road that we have around here. This thing is so good to ride fast in the twisties though. It's so flickable. The slipper clutch works good, so when you have to bang down a couple of gears, you don't get any wheel hop. It reduces engine braking, which personally I'm not really a huge fan of. I like a bit of engine braking, and this bike doesn't have very much at all. I actually like that on my Aprilia, that when you're in the sportiest engine mode, it has more engine braking than the road mode. Triumph did a really good job on the fueling. This bike, since it has the full system Akrapovic exhaust, has the ECU map for the Aero full system. And it seems to work pretty good. It still has that characteristic Triumph 4,500 RPM part throttle stumble. I remember spending a lot of time trying to dial that out on my first gen 675. And it's just a characteristic of something, whether it's the air box or the velocity stacks or something. So it's really not that noticeable. You don't ride in that RPM very often, especially out here. I haven't noticed it at all riding today in the twisties. I mostly noticed it riding around town because you end up like putting along in third gear and you end up at 4,500 RPM and you can hear it kind of like stumbles and misses. Very, very small complaint as far as fueling goes though. It always feels really light, which it is. I mean, it's down around 400 pounds, just a little bit over 400 pounds. And the way it holds its weight, carries its weight down low, Triumph really did a lot of work with mass centralization on this last redesign of the Daytona. And it's really done a good job. You certainly don't feel very many of those 400 pounds when you're flicking the bike around. They lightened the wheels on this last round of Daytona Update 2. The R has the same wheels as the regular Daytona, but when they updated the bike in 2012 or 13, they made the wheels lighter, along with the chassis narrower and the whole bike lighter and a few more horsepower. All just makes a very easy to handle bike before just that much sharper. And of course on the R you got these Olin suspension pieces just soaking up the bumps. To me, being a pretty average height, the ergos feel good. I don't think that they feel crammed. I'm 5'10" though. If you're 6'2", it might feel a little short in the cockpit and a little cramped in the knees. And I think if you're on the shorter end, it might not be bad. The seat height is relatively low and the tank is narrow. So it's not that hard to reach the ground, especially compared to the old Daytonas, which had a really high seat. If I had any single complaint about the ergonomics of this bike, it would be the shape of the tank. And I have this exact same complaint about the Street Triple. The cutouts for where your legs are supposed to go and where your knees are supposed to squeeze the tank are in the wrong spot. Your knees actually end up on this little plastic fill panel below the tank and partially on the frame. There are tech specs tank grips on this bike and our Street Triple. And on both of those bikes, your knees don't really even hit the area where the tank grips are. You end up below them. You almost need another piece of tank grip just below that on the plastic piece or on the top of the frame so that your knee makes more contact with the grippy part. So I've had a great time riding this bike today. Super huge thanks to my friend that loaned me this bike so I could try it out. I really like it. Triumph really has a great bike with the Daytona, and the R model just takes it up one more notch. Makes an already great bike just that much sharper. It's been super fun riding it. The bike is really refined. It's really fast. It's really agile. I'm really a big fan. Personally, I do miss the leader bike horsepower a little bit, but that's not anything to take away from this bike because it's obviously a super sport. Can't directly compare it with a leader bike. I would say the good thing about that less horsepower though is that you get to exploit more horsepower from this bike than you do from a leader bike. You can't be using 100% of the power on a leader bike all the time, otherwise you're always going triple digits and on the verge of going to jail or the morgue. With this bike, it's still incredibly fast, but you get to use more of the throttle. You get to get that thing to the stop more times than you would with a leader bike. I found that especially today, following the two guys on leader bikes, following my buddy on his new R1 and the new S1000RR. Obviously this bike has to work a lot harder to keep up in the straightaways and coming off the corner, but you could really keep up with them because this thing turns in so fast. It feels so agile. It really hangs with the big boy bikes. I won't say easily, because you really have to wring its neck a bit, but it can do it. And I bet at the track, it's even more even. With a good rider on this, I bet that you can turn the same lap times as people on big bikes. This thing feels like it urges you to carry more corner mid-speed. Whereas on the leader bike, you really feel like you need to square off the corner, limit your corner speed, and perfect the trajectory on the way out of the corner. This thing really likes to have high corner speed. It feels like a 250 almost. So thanks for watching. If you liked this, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, comment below, troll me away as YouTube commenters do so well. Appreciate your time.
It sounds like I have a predator right behind me.
Yeah.
Like it's a little scary.